In a quiet shrine courtyard, a traveler opens a book bound in cloth, its pages waiting for red ink. This is the Goshuin, a seal that marks both devotion and memory, stamped with sacred precision. For centuries, pilgrims across Japan have carried these books, each stamp becoming proof of their journey. Today, Goshuin blend faith, calligraphy, and art, drawing not only the devout, but also seekers of beauty. To open a Goshuin book is to hold a fragment of Japan's sacred world alive in ink and ritual. Yet behind these graceful stamps lies a history of power, pilgrimage, and shifting identities. From imperial courts to common townsfolk, Goshuin have carried meanings that extend far beyond ink. Each brushstroke and seal reflects not only the sacred, but also the politics and culture of its age. To follow its trail is to uncover a living story where devotion, art, and tourism converge in Japan. This film begins with the seal, but journeys deeper into the spirit of a nation shaped by ritual and ink. In Kyoto's temples, visitors line up not for grand sermons, but for the moment their book meets the seal. Each red impression is more than ink. It is a handshake between human devotion and divine recognition. Monks and priests apply these seals with brush and stamp, blending ritual precision with artistic flourish. The book itself becomes a living archive, a chronicle of footsteps across mountains, shrines, and city streets. To hold it is to hold a map of spiritual topography, charted not in borders, but in blessings. Tourists from abroad now join pilgrims, drawn by beauty as much as by faith, creating a new hybrid ritual. The brushwork curves with elegance, names of deities or temples flowing like rivers of black across the page. A red seal lands firmly, like thunder on silk, completing a performance both sacred and ephemeral. What began as proof of pilgrimage now becomes a passport to culture, bridging centuries with every impression. Imagine a journey where each step leaves not footprints, but inked seals echoing through time. From mountaintop temples to city shrines, Goshuin turn landscapes into living chapters of devotion. Each stamp whispers stories of emperors seeking legitimacy, monks preserving art, and pilgrims finding hope. To trace these marks is to trace Japan's transformation, where ink mirrors the shifting tides of history. And in every book, we glimpse the balance of the sacred and the ordinary coexisting on a single page. Some see only souvenirs, but for many, the Goshuin is a thread tying them to ancestors and unseen gods. In this film, we invite you to follow the ink trail, from ancient rituals to today's cultural revival. The Goshuin is not a relic of the past, but a living practice that bridges devotion, art, and identity. Our story begins here, with a seal in red, a brush of black, and a nation written in ink. The earliest roots of Goshuin trace back to the 7th and 8th centuries when Buddhism entered Japan. From China came ritual seals and talismans, used in Taoist and Buddhist esoteric practices of the 4th century. These sacred marks were not casual decorations, but symbols of spiritual authority and ritual validation. In early Japanese temples, seals authenticated copied sutras, proving devotion through laborious transcription. The seal linked human effort with divine acknowledgement, fusing physical writing and sacred approval. By the Heian period, Goshuin became integrated into temple record systems, functioning as official documents. Aristocrats sought seals not only as marks of piety, but as credentials binding them to elite institutions. The act of receiving a Goshuin marked both devotion and social rank, intertwining faith with status. During the Kamakura era, warriors supported temples, spreading Goshuin culture through new networks of power. These seals now served as receipts for offerings, legitimizing both religious devotion and political loyalty. With temples holding economic power, Goshuin validated land rights and transactions, becoming instruments of law. Such uses blurred sacred and secular, showing how religion and governance were deeply entangled in Heian Japan. Goshuin thus evolved from ritual markers into symbols of trust, bridging faith, law, and politics. By institutionalizing seals, temples reinforced their authority, elevating Goshuin into sacred bureaucratic artifacts. What began as an esoteric practice had by Kamakura become an everyday instrument of faith and order. Scholars debate whether Goshuin in this period were sacred acts or administrative tokens of authority. Regardless, their dual role cemented Goshuin as vital documents, intertwining religion with the state itself. These foundations would later support the flourishing of pilgrimage culture when commoners gained access. The Heian and Kamakura centuries thus transformed Goshuin from esoteric seals into public symbols of faith. By then, the red seal was no longer hidden in temples. It had begun its journey across the nation. In the Muromachi period, Goshuin began to merge with pilgrimage culture, marking visits to sacred sites. Pilgrims sought seals as tangible proof, each red mark recording not just presence, but spiritual encounter. During the Azuchi Momoyama era, Toyotomi Hideyoshi's Shuing-sen licenses spread the seal's prestige. Though related to maritime trade, the same term reinforced the authority of Goshuin as state-sanctioned marks. By Edo, the Tokugawa Bakufu institutionalized temple and shrine visits, and Goshuin became standardized proofs. Ordinary townsfolk now joined nobles and monks as Goshuin shifted from elite privilege to mass participation. The Goshuin Cho, a bound book for collecting stamps, spread widely among Edo's growing pilgrim networks. Each page became a miniature relic, calligraphy and vermilion combining to form sacred personal archives. Pilgrimages like the Saigoku Kannon route and Issei visits made Goshuin central to religious tourism culture. Collecting seals became a spiritual journey and a social pastime, linking devotion with popular entertainment. Artistic value also grew, as priests competed to create seals with elaborate brushwork and striking symbolism. Some stamps featured Buddhist sutra excerpts, others enshrined the name of the kami or revered temple. Goshuin became treasured keepsakes, collected like artworks, reflecting both spiritual merit and aesthetic taste. For Edo commoners, journeys to obtain Goshuin were both acts of faith and rare opportunities for travel. In this era, Goshuin culture expanded beyond temples, weaving itself into Japan's broader social fabric. Historians note that Edo's systematized Goshuin reflected the Bakufu's need to regulate religion and mobility, yet pilgrims embraced it eagerly, transforming regulation into devotion, bureaucracy into vibrant tradition. The Goshuin of this era thus embodied both sacred continuity and the playful creativity of common life. By the close of the Edo period, the culture of collecting seals had become firmly woven into Japanese identity. Goshuin were no longer just seals, they had become cultural passports, linking sacred sites and shared memory. The Meiji Restoration of 1868 shattered old patterns, enforcing Shinbutsu Bunri, the separation of gods and Buddhas. Temples and shrines, once intertwined, were forced into distinct systems, and Goshuin followed this division. Buddhist Goshuin emphasized sutras, deities, and mantras, while Shinto seals centered on shrines and enshrined kami. The state reshaped rituals, embedding Goshuin into its nationalistic ideology, turning devotion into civic duty. By the early 20th century, Goshuin were mobilized under state Shinto, serving propaganda as well as piety. During wartime, Goshuin sometimes bore imperial slogans, blending sacred ink with the machinery of nationalism. Pilgrimages to Yasukuni Shrine, for instance, turned Goshuin into souvenirs of loyalty to state and emperor. Scholars debate whether this politicization diluted sacred meaning or created a new civic spirituality. After Japan's defeat in 1945, state Shinto was dismantled, and Goshuin entered an age of religious freedom. Temples and shrines revived Goshuin as symbols of peace and tradition, distancing them from wartime ideology. In the booming post-war economy, Goshuin culture intersected with tourism, drawing pilgrims and casual visitors alike. Collecting seals evolved into a national pastime, with colorful books sold at temples and train stations. Goshuin thus became both sacred souvenirs and cultural products, balancing reverence and commodification. Critics warn that commercialization risks hollowing tradition, yet others argue it ensures cultural survival. Through these transformations, Goshuin remained resilient, adapting to each era without losing its essential symbolism. By the late 20th century, Goshuin culture was no longer limited to religion. It entered pop culture and media. Television shows and travel magazines featured Goshuin as must-try experiences, spreading awareness nationwide. For modern Japan, Goshuin stand as cultural bridges, heritage reinterpreted for pilgrims, tourists, and collectors alike. Their journey from ritual seals to tourist treasures reflects Japan's ability to modernize while honoring tradition. The Red Seal, born in sacred halls, now thrives at the intersection of faith, memory, and cultural industry. In the decades after World War II, Japan rebuilt not only cities and economy, but also religious practices. Goshuin, once tied to wartime ideology, re-emerged as symbols of peace, memory, and spiritual resilience. The 1960s economic boom fueled domestic tourism, and Goshuin became highlights of temple and shrine visits. Pilgrimage routes revived, from Shikoku's 88 temple trail to urban shrines, Goshuin marking every sacred stop. Collecting seals turned into a family activity, blending spirituality with leisure in Japan's new middle class. By the 1980s, glossy guidebooks promoted Goshuin tourism, ranking sites by beauty and cultural prestige. Shrines began designing unique stamps, some seasonal, others commemorative, appealing to collectors and tourists. This period saw the rise of Goshuin as artistic artifacts, valued as much for calligraphy as for devotion. International visitors noticed the practice, treating Goshuin as exotic souvenirs and cultural gateways. Some scholars worried that tourism-driven demand risked reducing Goshuin to commodities rather than sacred acts. Despite debates, Goshuin thrived as hybrid symbols, balancing sacred tradition with Japan's growing consumer culture. The Heisei era, beginning in 1989, brought renewed interest in heritage, with Goshuin central to cultural revival. Media campaigns highlighted Goshuin as living traditions, accessible to youth as well as elderly devotees. anime and pop culture references began to merge with Goshuin, drawing new audiences from global fandoms. Goshuin thus entered the late 20th century not as relics, but as evolving practices bridging past and present. Foreign museums began to exhibit Goshuin books, framing them as Japanese calligraphy and cultural heritage. Academic studies multiplied, interpreting Goshuin as windows into Japan's religious adaptation and modern identity. By the end of the Heisei era, Goshuin had become both national icons and global cultural touchstones. Their survival and reinvention proved a pattern. Japanese traditions thrive by adapting without losing essence. The Goshuin thus entered the 21st century not as a relic of faith, but as a living cultural ambassador. Entering the 21st century, Goshuin culture expanded rapidly, fueled by digital media and global tourism. Instagram and travel blogs showcased colorful Goshuin books, turning sacred seals into viral visual icons. Young people, once distant from shrines, embraced Goshuin as trendy experiences combining faith, art, and lifestyle. Temples responded with creative designs, some featuring mascots, anime motifs, or limited edition seasonal seals. Collecting Goshuin became a gamified quest, with apps mapping routes and rewarding pilgrims with digital badges. International tourism surged, and Goshuin became prized souvenirs for visitors seeking authentic Japanese culture. Airports and train stations even sold Goshuin books, integrating tradition into the infrastructure of mass travel. Some shrines offered multilingual explanations, adapting rituals to ensure accessibility for foreign audiences. Critics worry that this accessibility risks oversimplifying sacred meaning, reducing Goshuin to tourism tokens. Others argue globalization helps Goshuin survive, transforming them into cultural ambassadors across borders. Digital Goshuin experiments appeared, with QR codes linking seals to online archives and temple histories. Some apps even simulate stamping, letting users collect virtual seals during pandemic travel restrictions. Traditionalists resisted, arguing digital forms lacked the sacred aura of brush and vermilion ink. Yet many young practitioners embraced innovation, balancing digital convenience with reverence for tradition. Goshuin thus became laboratories of adaptation, reflecting Japan's broader struggle to modernize spirituality. By the 2020s, social media trends like Goshuin girls highlighted young women documenting their seal journeys. Global fandoms linked Goshuin with anime pilgrimages, merging pop culture devotion with sacred traditions. In this new century, Goshuin are not static relics, but evolving bridges between identity, memory, and globalization. Their journey shows how Japan modernizes tradition without erasing its sacred inked heart. The Red Seal, once esoteric and local, now thrives as both spiritual act and global cultural phenomenon. Goshuin embody devotion made tangible, where brush and seal turn invisible prayers into visible artifacts. The vermilion seal symbolizes vitality and sacred boundaries, echoing cosmological order in Japanese thought. Calligraphy inscribed beside seals often records kami names or Buddhist sutra fragments, reinforcing sacred presence. For many, Goshuin are compact altars, objects where art and ritual intersect within daily religious practice. In Kyoto's Kiyomizu-dera, visitors describe the first red stamp as a heartbeat echoing through sacred space. Families often collect Goshuin together, binding generations into one shared archive of gratitude and memory. In Tokyo's Yasukuni Shrine, 3 generations queue patiently, each child adding a page to the family book. The tactile act of turning washi pages deepens embodied memory, linking sensory touch with sacred encounter. Thus, Goshuin function as mnemonic devices, anchoring spiritual lessons within sensory and emotional memory. A student in Nara's Todaiji recalls how the ink's fragrance lingered, fixing the moment into lasting memory. Culturally, Goshuin mediate between local identity and national tradition, uniting village shrines with imperial cults. Artistic competition among priests elevated Goshuin into works valued for beauty as much as spiritual merit. Collectors treat them as art portfolios, while devotees stress their enduring role as sacred evidence. During a Kyoto exhibition, visitors admired pages from Edo pilgrimages, marveling at both artistry and devotion. This duality allows Goshuin to thrive, part art, part ritual, part cultural passport across generations. Beyond religion, Goshuin cultivates civic virtues, patience in queues, gratitude in offerings, respect in rituals. Economically, they sustain shrines through donations, linking spiritual expression with cultural preservation. A craftsman in Kanazawa notes how Goshuin demand handmade washi, ensuring survival of traditional papermaking. Ultimately, Goshuin crystallized Japan's ethos. Tradition adapts without erasing, devotion expressed through artistry. To study Goshuin is to witness how religion becomes culture, and how culture becomes lived memory. On Shikoku's 88 Temple Trail, Goshuin certify presence and progress across a demanding spiritual map and coastline. The final stamp often signifies vows completed, closing journeys with a bell-like calm that lingers for years. Monks explain the exchange is never a purchase, but recognition of prayer offered with steady sincerity today. At Tokyo's Kanda Shrine, office workers pause at noon for a seal that steadies restless digital days between emails. In Fukuoka, mothers collect stamps as blessings, small shields guarding a child's uncertain future during commutes. Beyond pilgrimages, Goshuin anchor shrines in city rhythms, making devotion compatible with modern schedules. Edo Maid books urge travelers to gather seals, framing journeys as moral education and civic cultivation. Goshuin aestheticize impermanence. Bold strokes record moments that will soften, fade, and still matter. Because fragility deepens meaning, worshippers learn that faith renews through repetition more than permanence. At Nagano's Zenkoji, a stamp from a fire-damaged hall is displayed as witness to survival and care for locals. Artifacts like these turn loss into cultural memory, transforming scars into sacred narratives in ink and practice. Families share one book, layering births, exams, and recoveries, weaving private timelines into heritage. Craft traditions endure as stamps prefer handmade washi and rich sumi, sustaining local artisans and shops. Collectors treat pages as portfolios, while devotees insist each mark still functions as sacred evidence. A Kyoto exhibition displayed Edo pilgrimage pages. Visitors marveled as skill flowed together with devotion. A Hiroshima survivor calls Goshuin proof that fragile life can still carry quiet, grounded, sacred strength. Thus, Goshuin translate prayer into art, art into memory, and memory into culture people can carry that lasts. Their force lies less in eternity than in ritual repetition that renews bonds across generations within families. Through such stories, stamps become bridges, linking moving lives with a durable sense of identity across seasons. To see Goshuin clearly is to see how practice, artistry, and community reinforce each day with patient repetition. Goshuin blur the line between sacred ritual and artistic performance, blending reverence with aesthetic invention. Priests often refine their calligraphy styles, producing strokes that reveal both lineage and personal artistry. In Ise Jingu, visitors compare subtle variations in seals, seeing artistry emerge from disciplined ritual patterns. Collectors praise some Goshuin as avant-garde, where bold ink splashes transform prayer into striking expression. A Kyoto calligrapher recalls apprenticing under a priest, learning that beauty must never obscure sacred intent. Goshuin also teach patience, waiting in lines, watching ink dry, sensing devotion unfold through gradual rhythm. Children often recall first stamps as lessons in stillness, learning respect for silence within sacred spaces. At Koyasan's Kongobuji, pilgrims speak of pages heavy with ink, weight symbolizing burden lifted by faith. These embodied acts show Goshuin as moral pedagogy, teaching humility, discipline, and gratitude beyond doctrine. In Osaka, a teacher brings students to Tenmangu Shrine, using stamps as lessons in heritage and responsibility. Economically, Goshuin sustains shrines, each donation linking private devotion to broader preservation of heritage. Local shops thrive on selling brushes, ink, and paper, sustaining craft ecosystems tied to religious practice. A Nara papermaker explains that shrine demand keeps handmade washi alive, preventing extinction of fragile craft. Collectors highlight artistic innovation, while clergy insist stamps remain primarily acts of devotion, not display. This tension keeps Goshuin dynamic, balancing sacred solemnity with artistic creativity across changing generations. Ultimately, Goshuin embody Japan's ethos, blending devotion, artistry, economy, and pedagogy into lived culture. They remind us that culture survives not by freezing forms, but by renewing bonds through ritual repetition. At a Hiroshima exhibition, survivors placed Goshuin beside relics, asserting fragile ink could still hold strength. Through such acts, Goshuin transform into bridges, linking impermanence of life with durability of cultural memory. To honor them is to see how stamps embody resilience, identity, and shared survival across generations. Goshuin link local devotion and national identity, stitching village shrines into shared culture today. Each page records participation in heritage, aligning private vows with a wider, nationwide imagined community. In Ibaraki, families compare seals at summer stalls, pride rising as pages fill with bold vermilion at night. Festival drums, lantern smoke, and stamping tables fuse prayer with dance, food, and shared neighborhood care. Priests explain each seal affirms ties to kami and neighbors, reinforcing everyday civic solidarity and daily trust. Donations exchanged for stamps sustain carpenters and caretakers, preserving fragile wooden sanctuaries. Brush, ink, and washi suppliers survive through shrine demand, embedding crafts within ritual economies. In Gifu, a papermaker, describes steady orders from shrines that kept his family trade alive for years through slumps. Visitors feel heritage in thick paper and wet ink, learning that devotion is also palpable material culture. Thus, Goshuin weave economy, aesthetics, and ethics, turning offerings into engines of continuity today. Goshuin also work as cultural passports, granting entry into layered landscapes of meaning, duty, responsibility. Edo travelers used stamped pages as proof of journeys, publicly displaying discipline through recorded steps. Today, school groups in Nara collect stamps, calling them evidence of shared youth, responsibility, and belonging. Teachers say the ritual turns field trips into living civics, where memory, etiquette, and heritage meet. They bridge past and present, confirming continuity, while history and demographics quietly shift around them. In Issei, a volunteer guide demonstrates careful stamping, explaining why beauty must not obscure sacred intent. In Osaka's Tenmangu, alumni return on exam weeks, adding seals that anchor gratitude, focus, and perseverance. Collectors debate artistry, while clergy insist stamps remain worship first, not decoration for display. Altogether, Goshuin bind stories, livelihoods, and ritual into frameworks recognizable across Japan enduringly. To turn a page is to join a nation, one seal at a time, crafting identity through ink, memory, and repetition. Goshuin symbolize continuity of devotion, reminding people that memory and faith endure through repeated rituals. Each seal embodies impermanence, capturing a brief visit while preserving it as cultural testimony on paper. At Kyoto's Kiyomizu-dera, visitors recall receiving Goshuin as moments of intimacy with centuries-old tradition. A monk explained that each stamp is a welcome, transforming strangers into members of the temple's history. These narratives show Goshuin as archives of belonging, recording devotion while producing shared cultural memory. Goshuin blur boundaries between worship and tourism, functioning as both spiritual affirmations and cultural souvenirs. In Nikko, foreign visitors describe Goshuin as living museums, each page expanding their grasp of heritage. Shops nearby sell brushes and custom books, proving how devotional economies merge with cultural industries. Priests emphasize that donations are not payments, but offerings, transforming exchanges into gestures of reverence. This duality shows Goshuin's resilience, balancing sacred intent with pressures of modern cultural consumption. Collectors argue some Goshuin verge on modern art, while clergy insist they remain primarily sacred prayers. In Tokyo, an artist recalls framing Goshuin for exhibition, sparking debate over devotion and display. Critics claim framing strips stamps of spirit, while supporters argue creativity keeps traditions alive today. In Osaka, a collector loaned his Goshuin book to a museum, shifting devotion into national exhibition space. These cases highlight tension, yet also adaptation, proving Goshuin safeguards sacred purpose while evolving. Ultimately, Goshuin embody balance, art without losing faith, commerce without losing sanctity, tourism without losing meaning. They endure as cultural bridges, carrying prayers across centuries while adapting to diverse audiences today. To read them is to see Japan negotiating heritage, resilience, and creativity in one living tradition. Turning each page, people encounter continuity of devotion, artistry, and memory within fragile strokes. To honor them is to recognize Goshuin as bridges between impermanent lives and enduring cultural identity. Goshuin preservation today blends ritual discipline with conservation science, keeping sacred books alive. Shrines train staff to handle washi properly, managing humidity and light so inks stay readable for decades. Conservators record each page with high-resolution imaging, building archives that safeguard designs and scripts. Workshops teach visitors to dry ink, turn pages gently, and store books flat to prevent warping or smearing. Digital registries track seal variants across regions, helping trace lineage and discourage counterfeits. At Kyoto's Kitano Tenman-gu, priests host weekend classes on Goshuin etiquette for students and office workers. In Nara's National Museum, curators exhibit Edo Goshuin, showing repairs that stabilized torn spines and corners. A Kanazawa papermaker supplies acid-free washi sized for stamping, preserving fibers against mold in humid summers. After typhoon seasons, volunteers inspect storage chests, air books in shade, and replace mildew-prone wrappers. A Tokyo student group made a bilingual care leaflet, handing copies to shrine visitors during Golden Week lines. Transmission means training successors. Senior shrine staff mentor juniors in brush control and old scripts. Priests debate refusing stamps on unsuitable paper, balancing hospitality with long-term legibility and respect. Some sites add appointment windows to reduce rush, improving stamp quality and lowering handling damage rates. Community archives accept donated books from estates, cataloging provenance to protect family and local memory. Mobile exhibitions visit libraries and schools, introducing Goshuin without risking temple originals in transit. At Mount Koya's Kongo-bu-ji, monks demonstrate stamping pressure and explain drying times for seasonal conditions. After a 2018 storage flood in western Japan, conservators freeze-dried damp books, saving pigments before they bled. A Hiroshima grandmother donated a wartime Goshuin. Curators stabilized brittle edges and digitized every spread. Craft guilds sponsor apprentices for brush makers, ensuring consistent hairs and tips suited for seal outlines. Ultimately, preservation and transmission align. Care extends life, and teaching creates future caretakers. Modern preservation is not only about objects, it is also about transmitting skills tied to Goshuin practice. Priests emphasize brush control, teaching apprentices how stroke pressure affects both aesthetics and durability. At Tokyo's Yushima Tenjin, workshops invite children to try stamping, introducing rituals as living cultural lessons. In Osaka, alumni groups fund printing of educational leaflets that explain care of books and proper etiquette. Technology assists transmission. Apps now guide pilgrims, showing stamp histories and conservation tips interactively. Museums curate exhibitions, where Goshuin are displayed beside calligraphy manuals, contextualizing sacred ink traditions. The Kyoto National Museum displayed Meiji-era Goshuin, showing how stamps adapted during modernization. Conservators document oral histories from priests, archiving instructions for brush preparation and seasonal adjustments. A Shizuoka volunteer filmed grandparents recounting wartime Goshuin practices, preserving memory for younger generations. Universities include Goshuin studies in heritage courses, training students to analyze stamps as cultural data. Intergenerational programs pair elders with youth, transmitting personal Goshuin stories alongside practical handling advice. In Nagasaki, a family donated a century-old Goshuin book, and descendants described its role in their identity. Craftsmen explained to visitors that inkstones, brushes, and papers must be sustained as cultural ecosystems. Apprenticeships, sponsored by craft guilds, ensure younger makers can continue traditions under senior masters. Such initiatives prove transmission is social as well as technical, binding families and communities through practice. Digital humanities projects scan Goshuin across Japan, creating searchable databases for researchers and priests alike. A 2021 Kobe University study mapped stamp designs, revealing regional clusters and evolving stylistic choices. Startups collaborate with shrines to provide cloud backups, ensuring books are digitally preserved even after disasters. Earthquake drills now include training for rescuing Goshuin collections, placing culture within emergency planning. Ultimately, preservation and transmission require institutions, artisans, and families to act together in stewardship. Preservation practices now intersect with tourism management, requiring shrines to safeguard culture amid heavy flows. At Fushimi Inari Taisha, staff introduced staggered lines, reducing handling stress on Goshuin books in peak seasons. Volunteers explain etiquette in English, Mandarin, and Korean, ensuring foreign visitors respect delicate procedures. Curators emphasize that Goshuin are not commodities, urging restraint against over-commercialized souvenir production. Some shrines experimented with QR codes alongside stamps, sparking debates about authenticity versus accessibility. In Sapporo, high school students created comics teaching Goshuin etiquette, blending youth creativity with heritage. A Hiroshima archive digitized family Goshuin, adding survivor testimonies, merging personal memory with preservation. Shrines trained part-time staff for proper stamping, avoiding hurried marks that degrade artistry and ritual dignity. Digital archives label context, season, festival, or priest, ensuring stamps remain linked to living traditions. In Yokohama, a collector opened his private library, allowing students to study rare Showa-era Goshuin. Earthquake drills incorporate training for handling cultural items, prioritizing Goshuin alongside sacred statues. Priests in Nara exchange techniques for ink preservation, testing natural stabilizers derived from plant extracts. A Kanazawa craftsman built humidity-controlled cases, merging woodworking skills with paper conservation science. Universities partner with shrines, developing joint courses that teach both history and preventive conservation. In Okinawa, a temple rebuilt after typhoon loss introduced training on waterproof storage to visiting monks. Ultimately, preservation is not static. It adapts with climate, technology, and the will to keep traditions alive. Goshuin endure as dynamic texts, where every careful stamp and preserved page safeguards cultural continuity. In each act of care, families, artisans, and priests weave continuity into fragile fibers and black ink. To protect Goshuin is to ensure that devotion, artistry, and memory remain visible for future generations. Preservation thus becomes devotion itself, a ritual of care that mirrors the prayers once stamped in ink. Goshuin transmission now integrates policy, training, and design to protect fragile books under pressure. Standards recommend reversible methods and logs, so every intervention remains traceable and ethically minimal. Shrines coordinate with local archives, sharing storage metrics to align climate targets with ritual schedules. New makers learn brush loading curves, ensuring dense strokes dry evenly without bleeding through washi fibers. Pilgrim briefings add care steps before stamping, reducing smears while preserving dignity for crowded sites. At Tsurugaoka Hachimangu, staff pilot ticket windows for stamps, easing queues and protecting drying intervals. A Kochi paper mill revived kozo fields for acid-free sheets, linking rural work to long-term conservation outcomes. A curator in Saitama demonstrated leaf casting for tears, restoring edges without hiding the book's history. Following heat waves, Hokkaido shrines tested night stamping, lowering lamp exposure that speeds pigment fade. Community funds finance UV films and airflow fans, small upgrades that greatly reduce cumulative light damage. Universities co-teach modules with clergy, pairing codicology labs with workshops on etiquette and safe handling. A volunteer network creates loan kits for schools, standard supports that prevent spines from bowing during display. Metadata profiles record priest, season, and event, keeping digital surrogates anchored to lived context. Counterfeit alerts flag unusual layouts and inks, protecting trust among travelers and shrines welcoming them. Guides translate care instructions into simple steps, empowering first-time visitors to respect vulnerable pages. At Mount Koya, monks mentor apprentices on pressure control, calibrating stamps for humid summer and dry winter air. After rains in Kyushu, responders freeze-dried wet volumes, then flattened leaves between inert blotters. An Ueno lab built a digital twin of a Goshuin, testing display scenarios virtually before lending original pages. Craft guilds certify brushes and inks yearly, incentivizing materials that age predictably in shrine climates. Ultimately, preservation works when policy, craft, and hospitality move together to keep prayer legible for heirs. Preservation efforts today expand beyond shrines, involving schools, museums, and families in collective stewardship. Programs integrate Goshuin into cultural heritage education, treating them as living bridges to Japan's traditions. At Kyoto University, seminars invite priests to explain brush rituals, linking scholarship with embodied practice. Families preserve Goshuin books in household shrines, transmitting devotion as part of heirlooms alongside photos. Curators note such private archives sustain memory, adding resilience where institutions cannot always reach. In Nagano, schools assign fieldwork projects where students document local Goshuin practices with photographs and interviews. A Kobe exhibition paired children's drawings with historic Goshuin, showing continuity between youth imagination and ritual. Museums provide interactive kiosks, letting visitors virtually stamp books while originals remain protected in storage. In 2022, a Tokyo family donated a wartime Goshuin with diaries, combining material culture and personal testimony. Local libraries host workshops on paper repair, teaching citizens simple steps to mend torn Goshuin pages. Shrines adopt disaster protocols, storing duplicate volumes off-site to mitigate risks from fire or flood. A Sendai case showed success. Backup Goshuin books preserved heritage when originals were lost to tsunami. Digital apps allow diaspora communities to view Goshuin remotely, linking identity across distance and time. Priests caution that screens cannot replace ink's tactile aura, stressing digital use as supplement, not substitute. International collaborations now pair Japanese shrines with overseas museums, exhibiting Goshuin as cultural diplomacy. UNESCO panels discuss Goshuin in wider heritage frameworks, noting risks and innovations from community practices. Case studies from Ise Jingu show combined priest-curator teams balancing sacred access with public education. Youth groups organize Goshuin festivals, where visitors learn care techniques through games and guided tours. Ultimately, preservation spreads through shared responsibility, proving Goshuin survive when many hands protect them. Transmission thus becomes global and local at once, rooting tradition while opening bridges across cultures. The journey of Goshuin shows ink and seal, evolving from sacred proof into a living, shared culture of memory. From monastic seals and sutra colophons to Edo pilgrim books, each mark tracked faith and society across eras. Through Meiji reforms and Shinbutsu Bunri, Goshuin endured as devotion, artistry, and quiet resistance. Today, many collect them as blessings and journals, linking ancestral practice with mass travel habits worldwide. Every stamp book becomes a diary of encounters, where shrines, temples, and travelers co-author memory over time. At Kyoto's Kiyomizu-dera, pilgrim lines mix with tour buses, seeking merit, meaning, and meticulous calligraphy. In Tokyo's Sensoji, Nakamise bustle feeds the hall. Goshuin serve as both tangible grace and take-home witness. Scholars still debate whether Goshuin should resist commercialization or evolve as participatory culture. Hybrid futures emerge. Timed cues, seasonal designs, rules that protect rights while inviting newcomers. As long as ink meets paper, Goshuin will keep binding people to places and to worlds beyond immediate sight. Goshuin are not frozen relics. They adapt, mirroring Japan's ongoing dialogue between preservation and reinvention. Younger collectors often share pages on Instagram or TikTok, turning private devotion into global storytelling. At Fushimi Inari Taisha, fox guardians frame lines of visitors, their stamps layering centuries of continuity. At Mount Koya, Shingon monks inscribe elaborate seals, each stroke echoing esoteric lineages reaching back to Kukai. These moments reveal Goshuin as bridges, spanning local shrines, global networks, and the digital age alike. Critics warn oversaturation risks emptying ritual weight, reducing stamps to souvenirs without sacred resonance. Preservationists argue regulation and education can sustain meaning while welcoming contemporary seekers. Priests in Nara introduced weighting systems and themed seals, balancing ritual dignity with tourist demand. The survival of Goshuin depends on this balance between living heritage and modern forms of expression. As long as people line up with notebooks in hand, the dialogue of ink and spirit will continue to thrive. Goshuin embody a paradox: intimate devotion on a page, yet also a mass practice shaped by tourism and media. Each notebook records not only shrines, but also the traveler's choices, moods, and encounters along the way. In Hiroshima's Itsukushima Shrine, bright vermilion gates frame pilgrims holding books, awaiting calligraphied seals. In Tokyo, Asakusa's Senzoji Temple reveals Goshuin as democratic, welcoming locals, tourists, and spiritual seekers alike. Together, these examples show Goshuin as a living bridge, binding ritual gravity to modern creativity. Some argue Goshuin risked dilution if commodified too far, yet others see adaptation as proof of vitality. The debate mirrors Japan's wider challenge, sustaining sacred traditions while thriving in a hyper-connected world. Priests, artisans, and travelers all participate, ensuring Goshuin remain both authentic and accessible. Future research will trace local variations, from Hokkaido's frontier shrines to Okinawa's island sanctuaries. What endures is simple. As long as ink flows onto paper, Goshuin will link humans to kami across time. If this story gave you new insight, imagine what more lies in Japan's traditions. We're building a journey across shrines, festivals, and hidden rituals. By subscribing, you help us keep these stories alive and bring more to light. Hit the subscribe button and join a community that values history and wonder. Share this film with friends who love culture, anime, or hidden histories. Your support ensures future episodes dive even deeper into Japan's untold heritage. Together, we keep traditions relevant and meaningful in the modern world. Subscribe now, and let's continue this journey into the heart of Japan. Every click strengthens this project and helps preserve cultural memory for the future. Join us and be part of keeping Japan's hidden heritage alive for generations to come.